Madam Web is a movie a lot of people wrote off pretty quickly. The trailers are abominable. Let's not, beat around the bush here. And the press tour that Dakota Johnson went on, who was the lead for this film, was a real head scratcher because she just openly seemed to despise the film with the way she talked about it. One of her interviews, she's like, "Yeah, I don't even know if the movie's good." And spoiler alert, turns out it wasn't. So maybe she really can see the future because she knew this one was a super stinker. This movie is a straight up clunker. And this film was produced by some of the best in the business, Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless. Those might not be household names, but I promise you're familiar with their work. Their resume is nothing but heaters. Dracula Untold, Last Witch Hunter, Gods of Egypt, Power Rangers, Morbius, and Madam Web. They are, without any exaggeration, undoubtedly the Kobe Bryant and Shaq of producing dog shit movies. They only write horrible garbage, and somehow they keep getting worse. Now, I wouldn't say this film is worse than Morbius, but I would say it's just as bad. It's not better, it is just exactly the same as Morbius in terms of how dog shitty it is. So it's really impressive that throughout this decade of Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless working in Hollywood, they have somehow found a way to start awful and find new ways of getting worse at it, and then accidentally making the Power Rangers movie that was at least pretty decent. I didn't hate that one. But everything else, everyone hates for the most part. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about Madam Web here. So, I'm not clairvoyant, but I think everyone's going to dislike this one because there's almost nothing to like about it. The actors and actresses in here, they really don't seem to try very hard at all, save for a couple of scenes, which I think probably were some of the first scenes that were shot when the script was different. As I understand it, this script went through a lot of changes from when Dakota signed on to what eventually got puked out onto the big screen here. So I think some of the good scenes where like the performances are actually giving a shit about what's going on were probably from the original shoots before everything got cattywampus and ruined somewhere along this messy journey. But for the most part, you're not even really watching superheroes versus supervillains. You're watching zombies kind of just speak at each other occasionally. It's like you're watching performances from people that are sleepwalking through their lines. There's really no true effort. And it's clear from the very beginning of this film. I wrote notes in the beginning because I couldn't believe what I was watching, and then at some point I got hypnotized and stopped writing notes, and then at the very end, after everything had happened, the dust started to settle as it was like wrapping itself up in the last 2 minutes, I just instantly fell asleep. Like, I didn't even feel myself getting tired. My eyes just closed and I was out for like 3 minutes until Aaron, who went with me, was like, "Charlie, you're sleeping." I was like, oh my god. I didn't even know. Like, my body shut down from like how confused I was that this movie even got made in the state that it's in. But anyway, very opening. This is in the trailer, that meme. "He was with my mother when she was studying spiders right before she died," or whatever. That line's not in there just like that, but it is in there in the same essence, just broken up. So from the very beginning, that bad guy Ezekiel's line is, "I agreed to be your bodyguard because I thought you were close to finding the spider that can give us the superpowers if we can use its abilities." And I think I was paraphrasing because that was a few lines. She interrupted him at some point, but his first line is, I agreed to be your bodyguard because you told me you were close to finding the spider that's going to give us superpowers," or something to that effect. And she's like, "It's a very elusive spider because it's so powerful and gives all of these superpowers." There's no dialogue in this movie that would ever be something a single human being would say to another in the real world. It is baffling that anyone signed off on it. Because these aren't characters, they're just plot point vessels and nothing else. No character here has any personality whatsoever, especially not the three spider women that Madam Web is protecting. They don't get any fleshing out whatsoever. They're basically just three characters that need to be saved just because, and that's it. There's no real reason for it. And Madam Web is a very interesting case study here because she's a paramedic, thus her whole career is saving people, yet when it comes to saving these three spider women, she tries her best to just dump them off onto their parents, which is basically just a death sentence because they're being hunted by evil spider guy. So, like, I don't know what she thought would happen there. Like, the parents just hit spider guy with a frying pan to defeat him or something. But she does not want any part of this responsibility at all, even though her career is fucking saving people. She wants nothing to do with actually saving them and reluctantly does so. But I'm jumping all around now too. I'm so scatterbrained with how bafflingly bad this movie was. So anyway, like even from the very beginning, it was clear that this dialogue was going to be terrible. But it somehow finds a way to get even worse than you'd ever expect it to be. But anyway, so after the mother finds the spider, she takes it to the camp and Ezekiel betrays her. He shoots two of the people. The mom goes, "Oh, jeepers, creepers, zoinks. What are you doing?" And she says, "I don't understand why." And then goes on to explain that this spider, if we can use its properties, can help people. And that's when Ezekiel, the main bad guy, gets his only amount of, even an iota of an attempt to give him a background story or any motivation or whatever at all. He says, "Not interested in helping people because no one helped me and my family when we were starving." And then he shoots her. That's all we ever get about him as a character. After that, he becomes bent on just killing the three spider women because he can't stop having nightmares about them killing him as like a prophecy that's going to happen in the future. We get nothing else about that guy at all. He is actually just cartoonishly evil beyond that. Nothing else. And he also fucking sucks at being a supervillain because he has like these superhuman abilities, but all he does is walk menacingly and crawl on the walls sometimes, and that's it. He at no point ever really seemed like a threat at all. Even for a second. There wasn't a single scene where I was like, "Oh shit, he's here. This is gonna be a tough one." Also, he can like poison people by like holding onto them, like gripping them tight. But other than his cheese touch and like the ability to crawl on walls, he doesn't really do much else as a supervillain, except whine. But anyway, I actually pretty much summed up the entire narrative here. The only thing I left out is how Cassie was born. So after the mother gets shot, it turns out she was pregnant, and the locals that were using the spider's venom for superpowers picked up the mother and then delivered the baby for her after letting a spider bite her, which of course gave Cassie powers, which didn't awaken until that accident that is now in the iconic viral clip that's gone around where as a paramedic she tries to save somebody and then the car ends up hitting the water and she bumps her head and now she can see the future, kinda. So that's the origin of her power, and the narrative is she can see the future, and at one point she sees these three girls get killed by a spider guy, and he's a bad guy. She doesn't like bad guys, so she tries to save the girls from him, and then she's just on the run the entire time. And the spider guy wants to kill them because he doesn't want them to kill him. It doesn't get any deeper than that, really. It's very surface level shit, and that's kind of the entire narrative in a nutshell, with tons and tons and tons of awful scenes that make no sense at all. But I'm not even gonna bother breaking those down for you because who gives a fuck? They didn't give a fuck when making it, so why should you, the audience member? I will say though, this film, for being a superhero film, has no action at all. In fact, none of the superheroes even fight the bad guy. And they don't even wear a costume or anything at all until the very last scene of the movie. The only thing you get for like a superhero showdown is in Spider Guy's visions, where he sees the three Spider Women like beat him up and then toss him out of a window. And that's like a 30-second scene. After that, they never actually fight him at all. What happens is when he shows up, Cassie hits him with a taxi cab at one point, and then that stuns him. And then he shows up again like 30 minutes later, and then Cassie hits him with an ambulance, which stuns him. That's the extent of their fighting. The climactic final showdown, he basically beats himself. So Cassie's using her visions of the future and like kind of positioning him where he needs to be for the environment to take care of him, because, you know, the environment's going up in flames. They did set up like some traps to a certain extent, and they kind of like give him obstacles to go through, but it's not really fighting him. It's kind of like Amnesia when you're running away from the monster, basically. That's how their fights go with the evil villain, until eventually the environment beats him and then he gets crushed by a giant sign. It sucks. It sucks. This isn't a superhero movie or anything at all. This is a fucking slop fest, is what it is. It's not entertaining. Morbius, I would actually argue, was more entertaining than Madam Web, and that is saying something. But again, I don't think Madam Web is necessarily worse than Morbius. I still think they're about equal in terms of their shittiness. Another thing that's painfully obvious is that this movie did its absolute best to erase any and all mention of Spider-Man or anything in that universe whatsoever, and tried to keep all of that as minimal as possible, and you could actually feel some cuts where things were just scrubbed. So I truly believe the original vision for this film was something entirely different, and what we got is just a mess. And I'd like to give you a scene that I think perfectly encapsulates just how much effort went into this movie, like how much thought went into this movie at the end of the day. So while the three girls are hiding from Spider Guy, and I should explain, Spider Guy fucked an NSA woman and got her passcode to all of the cameras across the globe so that way he could track down the three girls from his nightmares. So he uses that technology to basically transfer his mind's eye image of these three women and get them in the real world, and he used the NSA computers to access all the cameras to real-time find them with his assistant. So that's how he's able to keep finding them. And Cassie and the gang knew that. They knew they needed to avoid cameras, and they eventually decided to go with Ben, who's Cassie's friend, and keep the three girls there while Cassie's doing some research of her own. And that's working really well. The three girls are at Ben's place. Spider Guy can't find them, and that's all, great stuff. And then the woman staying with Ben has her water break, and she's about to give birth. So now they're rushing to get her to the hospital. And by they, I mean the entire kit and caboodle. The entire group, for some reason, decides to accompany Ben and the woman to the hospital. So all three girls now get in a car and take off down public roads and immediately get picked up by cameras because fucking obviously they would. Why were they going with them to the hospital? I have no idea. They could have just stayed at the house because that was clearly working. And I don't know if I didn't hear the reason why they went with them or if they just didn't even bother because they didn't think anyone would be awake long enough to even get to that scene. I don't know. But they could have just stayed at the house and been completely safe and avoided conflict with Spider Guy if they had just stayed there. Which would have been the logical thing too, because why does Ben want these three teenage girls accompanying them to the hospital in the first place for the birth here? There's no logic to it. Why would you just fucking stay there? Just stay there and wait. But anyway, they don't. That's just an example of how little thought even really went into the movie. I just don't see what the point of making it even was anymore. It doesn't tie into anything Spider-Verse related. It doesn't want to. It really doesn't want to. And it doesn't really want to try to stand on its own two legs either, so why make it? I don't get it. It's just another blemish on the record of this screenwriting duo that keeps making trash. I like, after seeing it, I'm just kind of at a loss for words for what they expected the response to this one to be, because I really can't imagine anyone sitting down and enjoying it. The biggest sin this movie commits is that it's boring. It's really boring. If you're going to a superhero film, there's at least a couple of things you expect, like the basics of having fights at the bare minimum. Morbius, for all of its flaws, had fights. This doesn't even have that. There's none of that. It's just the worst dialogue ever, constantly, and nothing more. And somehow, even with all of this dialogue, you still learn nothing about the characters. They're still so bland because they don't even give them depth or try to. It's just constantly either saying not good jokes or just saying a whole bunch of fucking nothing to begin with. So anyway, to sum it all up, Madam Web, not good. Boo. Pretty stinky. If I was to plug it into the moist meter, I'd give Madam Web a 15%, I would say. But yeah, I wouldn't even call it like a fun bad movie. It was just bad. I don't know if this one's going to pop off with memes like Morbius did, because there's really nothing memeable about it other than really bad dialogue and nothing else. Yeah. But we'll see. Anyway, that's about it. So yeah. I actually got you with a classic prank. I wanted to mention one more thing. By the end of the film, Cassie finally, figures out how her powers work really well, and she immediately uses it to be annoying. So at the end of the film, she ends up going blind to match her comic book counterpart, and she immediately starts seeing the future for everything. And the way she applies this is the three girls come over with some takeout food, and she's like, "Oh, thanks for the," and then lists the takeout food, and they're like, "How did you know that?" And she just smiles, "I saw it." And then she says, "Bless you," to one of them, and she goes, "What do you mean, bless you?" Achoo! Predicting her sneeze. So she's using it just to be annoying. That's so hype. I mean, amazing. I just had to mention that. Okay, now that's it. See ya.